Macy Reyes is a 27-year-old wife and mother of three. A student of applied psychology, she wants to make people aware of cognitive and rational emotive behavioral therapy techniques. These techniques can be applied to your life in real time. She also practices Buddhism as a philosophy which contains unique patterns of thinking. These patterns oftentimes can create positive outcomes in one's life. We also talked about millennial marriage, keys to long-term success in a relationship, raising children, overcoming challenges, and love. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Thanks for tuning in. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Macy Reyes. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We were just talking about relationships and how you and Jeremy have been together since 2008. And how old are you now? I don't mean to age you so fast, but just for a timeline.
Not at all. I'm 27.
27. So it's super uncommon because you guys have, how long have you been married now?
This July will be 9 years. And
you have 3 kids.
Yeah. Ages
That's
7,
awesome.
4, and 1. I was actually pregnant 2013, 2016, 2019. There's a point where I was pregnant 3 times in 6 years. Who does that, but...
Wow. Well, you look great.
Thanks.
So what are some key factors, and we'll get into applied psychology and whatnot, but you being in this field now and actively thinking about not only bettering yourself, but I imagine your relationship and then your impact on your children's lives.
Yeah.
What are some key factors that you think helped you in your young relationship and making it work, besides the fact of chance that I imagine you guys have a good level of compatibility?
Well, I would actually not even say the compatibility thing, right? Because that's this idea that it's something we already have, and whether it, contradicts each other or not, it's work. It takes really a lot of work to say, do we want to fit this time together? Do we want to schedule this? Do we want to prioritize this? I always say, instead of saying, oh, I don't have time for that, you say, oh, I didn't prioritize that, and so just like you said before, anytime you're with someone, you are totally meshing your lives. It's something we aren't naturally inclined to do. It's, we're quite narcissistic in our youth. We don't really think about other people in that way. But I think the reason why it lasted so long and tips for success is just being able to be selfless for the first time, right? You're no longer just looking out for yourself. You start to see, different parts of people that kind of empower you and give you confidence to be better and to want to be better, to achieve more, given you have the right amount of support from that person, of course, and they give you the space to do these things, which all is, a process. So compatibility is only such a small part in my eyes.
That makes sense, especially at a young age. We're kind of almost taught to be a little selfish in your career choices and making decisions for you as an individual. But coming out of a long-term relationship a couple of years ago, I know what it's like to, you can't only make decisions based off yourself. You literally have another person that you're sharing life with. And if you're going to have any longevity or respect over time, you have to kind of teach yourself how to think like a group. There's 2 people
Right.
making one decision,
Yeah, it takes a lot of consideration that some of us maybe have more practice in, but some of us don't, and maybe people, much further down in their life still don't have that type of, outlook on life, which is totally fine if you're not trying to do that whole partnership. But actually a book by Harriet Lerner, it's called Dance of Anger. She really, really delves into this idea of togetherness and separateness. And she basically says that when you enter a relationship, it's up to you solely to decide what are you willing to kind of join in with, or what are you willing to separate from. And so, for example, if I want to eat something, Jeremy wants to eat somewhere else, and I'm like, oh, fine, we'll just go where you go, and then we eat that place. I'm like, God, I knew we shouldn't have come here, blah, blah, blah. It's she was just saying, how do you blame someone else when you made that sacrifice? You intentionally chose to go along with them, and then you're going to be bitter, resentful. And obviously a dinner choice is such a small scale thing, but and it, plays out to so many other things, like, choosing a job or relocating. And when you have children and a family to consider, it's a lot. And so she says that you don't have to fear that separateness. And in fact, when you do things separately, you're more easily able to come together afterwards. Your cup's a little fuller, you're a little more whole for that other person, rather than feeling, angry or resentment about their choices, ultimately really yours. So
Yeah, and there's a balance there because no one wants a pushover.
yeah,
And then also, you don't want someone that is agreeable, but then on the back end you get hit with a bunch of like backlash or complaining. Like you just said, if you made that decision,
yeah,
kind of go through with it, like you made that conscious choice. But there's also like, where is the line? Like some people like to say, like, where's the ball in the court? Like, does one person have more power than over the other person? And I think that's just a constant, like, fluid motion. And I think in our culture, it's definitely like guys always say, oh, like she's going to get what she wants, or I'm going to do whatever I can to make her
yeah,
happy, which I think is good. It has its merit and it goes way back. But I would argue too, in anything long term, there has to be like the best idea of balance within those two people and like how they're viewing the relationship.
totally.
And that's why I personally had to get out, just because I didn't feel that balance there. I was growing as a person, and no fret against anyone else, but I just had to move on for my own sake. And
Yeah,
I just wanted to be like free and live life and experience new things. But it's so commendable, and you've done something that's really uncommon, like your relationship and raising 3 awesome kids. It's not common nowadays. I think millennial culture has kind of taught us to be a little bit more individualistic, which has certain outcomes and benefits. Like people love the fact that women are moving up in the business world and they're having kids later, and that's an outcome of that ideology. But then on the flip side, it's kind of like, oh, if you're in a relationship and maybe you feel any friction, which there's going to be, or overcoming a problem, do you think that sometimes people just want to like escape, or it's like, oh, like I can't be this selfless, like I have to lean a little bit more selfish? And that seems to be a little bit more common nowadays.
yeah. Well, I think this idea that right now we have like social media, we have so much accessibility to so many people, and vast amount of knowledge, and so we always just think there's something better, right? Grass is greener, whatever. Which of course there will always be, right? So once you understand that you'll never be the best, and most likely, your partner will never be the best, but you guys kind of trust in this unknown of the future. You're just kind of willing to face it together, regardless of what it throws at you. That's what kind of makes you want to hang on and hold tight, because in this large amount of time we've been together, we've been through so many things. Deaths in the family, divorces of family members, like just job, like just so many things. And so it's just really nice to come home to someone that sees you fully and accepts you for who you are unconditionally. And most of the time when, hopefully eventually, but maybe in the earlier stages, doesn't really expect anything of you because they love you unconditionally, right? So they just kind of, allow you to show up as you are, whoever you are, and choose to be with you. And isn't that in and of itself like, wow, this is pretty nice. Like, I'm lucky, you want to still be with me. Because when we first got together, a lot of people would say like, what's marriage like? And, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I was like, honestly, it's like a slumber party with your best friend, like someone that you just always want to be around and, have this time to be in the beginning, of course, right? And then you see all these ugly parts and things like that, and all these fights and conflicts, and it's hard to go through, but it's kind of never ending. It's always going to be present. And so I always tell people, our relationship is any other relationship, just longer. It's not, better or worse or perfect. Like, I think people think once they get married, they reach this like destination of life, and from then on it's, who knows what, right? But it's not. It's the same, everything that it was before in a short-term relationship, just longer. We still can't stand each other sometimes. Like I said, we speak of divorce often, right? And I think that's real. So
You mean the culture, or like you two personally? talk about divorce
Oh,
often.
no, we do. Yeah, we do. Like
Uh,
when, you know, so we always have these dialogues and we're just kind of like, well, so is this a deal breaker? Because that's really the
Gotcha.
bottom line. If it's not a deal breaker, then I don't want to hear you bicker about it, you know?
Hmm.
And that's where that passive aggressiveness that you were talking about, like when to be direct and all of that stuff, it's like you have to be assertive and concise about what you want because nobody's a mind reader, you know, whether it's an intimate relationship, a work relationship, a friendship. So if you're not making it evident what you want, you can't expect that from anybody.
And that's the worst feeling ever, I would say, is the passive aggressiveness. For me personally, it leads to resentment.
Yeah,
And that's
same.
the worst feeling because it's like you don't even put in any effort because like you don't know whether to get mad or just to completely step away. So you just avoid. You're just like, I resent you.
Yeah,
Like if a person comes into the room that you resent, that's such a bad feeling.
yeah,
And I want to lead this into your heading down the path in like applied psychology and psychology in general. And we spoke a little bit about like Buddhism as a philosophy, not as a religion,
right.
which I remember learning a little bit about in some of my philosophy of religion classes, and I've never really delved into it, but I've always had a respect for Buddhism in general just because I felt like it was a very unjudgmental
Yeah,
like religion or ideology to where like there's not one pathway to salvation. It's very open and
right.
mellow, and especially Western culture has this vision of like Buddha and whether it's like at the restaurant you go to and it's sitting
Yeah,
there in the front, or people just have this vision like, oh, like so calm, like this real big chubby guy who just chills all day.
yeah.
Or you have like monks who like shave their heads and all this stuff. They
So
just
extreme.
there's visions that go along with it. But you being someone that's in the applied psychology world, and I imagine it kind of couples and mirrors the Buddhism, or at least how you apply it and how you philosophize it in your life. Let's start going down there. So was it more Buddhism first, and then you wanted to go into like psychology, or was it at the same time? Or
Um, I guess a little bit of both. So when I spoke about, you know, having family trouble towards the end of high school, things like that, when I graduated, I had my also world religions class, and I was raised Catholic, like very heavily practicing family and Catholic. My grandparents were a part of the church, still are to this day, like just very serious. And so when I had this world religions class, my professor spoke about like a pastor having a wife, and I didn't even understand. I'm like, a priest can't have a wife? Like, what? And a girl said that out loud, and everybody like laughed at her, and they were like, "Oh my gosh!" And the professor was like, "Oh, honey, you must be Catholic or something." And I was like, "Wow, I know like nothing, you know." And so when we started talking about Buddhism, I just felt like there were so many new topics that I'd never been introduced to, and yet they resonated with me so deeply. Like, for example, just the idea of, you know, converting to it. Like, you don't have to do that. You know, it's not something that they necessarily even suggest you do. The Dalai Lama actually says if you are rooted in your faith and that's something you're comfortable with, use Buddhism as a philosophy to be a better practitioner in that. He doesn't recommend that you know, convert and do something that's unnatural to you. And so that was kind of like my start. And so from there, I started applying, you know, the principles and the philosophy. And I think as a kid too, I always kind of had this weird kind of like obsession with death. Like I think I was just kind of anxious, and I just always thought like, you know, what happens? Like I'm scared of hell. I like heaven. I don't know much about. They don't talk about that, and I just had no idea. Like how do we answer these questions? And Buddhism was just kind of like, well, what does it matter? It's gonna happen. You know, like why waste your precious time like worrying about it? And so that to me gave me like a wash of calm that I've never had before regarding that topic. And from there, it just kind of pieced together. And, you know, psychology just ended up being something I was actually kind of narcissistic about. I just found so many things that showed me why I was the way I was. And so I just wanted to go further and further. And through my studies, I found really cool parallels between the two. And so from there, I was just like, I think this is something I'm very passionate about, and has the potential to help so many people. So
that's amazing to go back to the Buddhism and kind of the Catholic and Christianity and all this different stuff, it is fascinating that a lot of the Christianity, like those religions, it's always about steering people like towards heaven or hell.
Right.
And I would argue from the very beginning, it was kind of like a tool, not necessarily for manipulation or malicious intent, like at a base level, but that's what it ended up doing because, like you said, you're growing up and you're like, wait, do I want to make decisions that are going to get me to heaven or get me to hell?
Yeah.
And I mean, that can create so many different pathways in your life of like decisions over time. Arguably, if that is the fact where I'm going to start making just decisions to not only like better myself and not harm other people, like you've got the commandments and all these things in place, like that's kind of good. Like it seems like it's shaping people to make better decisions to get to heaven and not go to hell. But on the flip side, there's been so much death and war and resentment and team oriented stuff like, oh, like if you're not practicing this religion, then you're not saved.
Right.
To bring it full circle, that's was my vision or interpretation of Buddhism. Is I love that fact about it, that it's very non-judgmental and kind of just be a good person, and it'll all work out.
Totally.
So with your applied psychology now, you're working on some sort of paper, correct? Or are you putting together some sort of program to help apply some of these practices to people's lives?
Yeah, so not putting together a program yet, and technically it's just considered pseudoscience. I haven't done any research. There's no empirical evidence of its, efficiency and things like that. But what I've found is that it works in real time. And so kind of going back to the fundamentals of Buddhism, you hear a lot about karma or whatever, and like what goes around comes around. That's not really exactly what it is.
I would love to talk about karma.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by it.
So, I mean, it's really just based upon like the law of nature, which is cause and effect, right? Where, there's not really anything in our universe that isn't dependent on something. Maybe the sun or something, but I don't know. It could still be dependent on something else.
It still is.
Yeah. And so with that being said, when you have an outlook of cause and effect with everything, you naturally just kind of start doing things intentionally, right? If you live a passive life and you just take it as it comes, you can't really complain when it's not what you want it to be, right? You have to have that active lifestyle and, wake up with intention, know what you want to do, and work towards that every day. And so that's kind of where my method comes from, is that it's a cause and effect type of application. I feel like it's most powerful when it's kind of shown through testimonies and like in real time. But the way, just to give some background, the way I came across it was through cognitive behavioral therapy, which is technically the type of therapy that's very solution focused. If your trauma or your childhood is not something that affects you and your behavior now, let's not really worry about that, right? Let's kind of focus on a solution, a therapeutic objective to make you healthier today and give you the right tools and resources to cope. And so if you kind of go further from CBT, there's something called REBT. It's Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. It was created by Albert Ellis in 1955. And it's what he calls a way to challenge and rationalize your emotions. So it comes with like a set of rules, which is kind of like, don't do the shoulda, woulda, couldas, because that's just playing out every possible scenario that you wish would have happened, but can never happen. It's not real. And so, you carry this weight with you and guilt or shame when there's nothing you can do about it, right? It also says that, people maybe who say, what's the point of everything? There is no point, right? To even sit there and waste your time looking for a point when it doesn't exist is also not active, it's passive. And also just that, what you put out isn't always going to be returned, right? So whether it's relationships or, anything really, it's just don't expect anything in that type of way. So those are kind of like the rules. There are a few more, but then he breaks it down into this method called an ABC method, which A being the activating event, B being the behavioral response, and C being the emotive consequence. So if I was to put that into example, like I got laid off, or not really, my job is still there, but it's not as busy. Makeup, it's, dying down a bit because exposure and stuff like that. So if I first knew that it was shutting down, my activating trigger, right? Getting laid off. My behavioral response is, what am I going to do? It's the end of the world. I can't, blah, blah, blah. And then now my emotive consequence is helplessness or worthlessness, maybe ideas of myself that aren't actually true. But if you change that, so the same activating response, which is, laid off, behavioral response is now, this wasn't ideal. However, it's a global pandemic. It's something a lot of people are experiencing. Unemployment's at a high rate. When you kind of look at things from a different perspective, now your emotive consequence is not worthlessness or helplessness, but it's not ideal, but still capable, right? Still confident in being able to do something about this, having some type of control of my outcomes. And so I saw this and I was just like, this is Buddhism. This is Buddhism in its essence, but it kind of turned a very Eastern spiritual, ritual, or religious type of practice into something for Westerners and backed by psychology. CBT is huge today. It's widely used, very short amount of time for therapy, like 6 to 8 weeks or so, because once you kind of go in there, find your therapeutic objective, you figure out how to cope, then you now have these skills to carry on and do other things, right?
So they do treat it as like a skill set almost.
Yeah.
That's very Western of us, because I've thought of like the middle step dealing with like perspective on what the initial issue is.
Yeah.
I know there's a balance there, and it's very gray, but like how many people are just unlucky in the sense that they were raised or their environment made them more prone to be like that super pessimistic just off the bat.
Yeah.
If you scale that up over 1,000 different decisions, you're going to react a certain way to a majority of them just because that's you as as a person.
Yeah.
And it might not even be your fault. But then we talked briefly about how to kind of like train your brain and like connect different pathways, which can actually, even though you were arguably that type of person before, you do have the ability to change kind of the way your machine operates, like in your head.
Right.
And that can put forth outcomes of like happiness or just a different outlook on that initial problem.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier said than done because like we're emotional beings and stuff. And sometimes when you're hit with a decision like being laid off or someone rear ends you or just all these different negative happenings that could be in your life, so many people are just off the bat emotionally inclined to react in that negative way.
Totally. I'm actually really glad you brought up pessimism because it was a large factor in how I came up with my application. So psychology says that optimism, and neither is better than the other. And in Buddhism, they always say middle way is best way. So in optimism, and I considered myself an optimist, you're too focused on the external factors and not enough on the internal factors. So, for example, if you break up with your significant other, you're like, oh, the universe, it wasn't in the cards, but you don't consider like, well, maybe I didn't do enough, or maybe because I cheated, or whatever it may be. And then pessimism is the opposite. So you're too focused on the internal and less on the external. So you're like, God, I'm such a terrible person. I knew I couldn't last in a relationship, and this is going to affect my chances with other relationships. And then external is like, you don't even consider their part in it and all of that. So with that being said, you have this clear division of two opposite ends of the spectrum. But really, to choose the middle way is my application. So and mine as in like something I've found. I don't know if I can claim it or not just yet. There's so many principles that were already out there. But what you do is you write your dilemma in a sentence. You circle the internal variable, what you can control. You circle the external variable, what you cannot control. And you only act on the one you can control. So, we talk about millennial marriage, things like that. I have a testimony of a friend of mine. She's recently engaged. She has a fiance, and she said that she saw him looking at, women on social media, like a hot IG model or something. And I said, oh, okay, how did that make you feel? And she's like, it made me feel a little insecure, and, it just kind of upset me. And I said, okay, did you talk to him about that? And she said, no, I don't want to, try to tell him what to do or anything. And so I said, well, why do you think it made you feel insecure or hurt? And she disclosed that their sexual life wasn't, super healthy or what she wanted it to be. And so I said, okay, well, in this dilemma, what you can't control is his actions and what he does, what he looks at, because it's not like us women are not guilty of looking and doing. It's not a male thing, only. And I said, but what you can control is strengthening your sexual relationship, putting in active time, maybe scheduling a date or, whatever it is for them to make sure that is healthy and strong and no longer affected by those external factors. So it's all internal. And it worked. That was kind of my first times that, it worked for me, but that was my first time sharing it with someone that I loved and cared for. And for her to say, we talked and it was a great discussion. And I really feel like she's just so much more confident in that area of our relationship. So.
Awesome. Oh, that's amazing. And I think it brings up the point of course, there's internal and external factors, but I think as humans, we're programmed to manipulate external factors. And sometimes that doesn't always work. Like you said, you're not always going to get the same vibe reciprocated to you, or you could put in a bunch of work and strategize and plan everything in relationships or business or whatever. And it doesn't always work. But it sounded like a communication issue too, to where there's human nature is to look at the opposite sex if that's what you're into. And now we have this app that just puts tens in front of you constantly. I mean, that's a fact. Like, it is what it is. But no, that's amazing. It actually worked for them.
Yeah, and I mean, you say a communication issue, but how much of everything is communication, right? Whether it's with someone else or internally. And I think that's what meditation truly is, not a religious spiritual practice, like I said, but more like a philosophy, is when you kind of just stop and you have a conversation with yourself and you just analyze, how am I feeling physically? Am I holding tension? What does that mean? And while emotions may be, fleeting or crazy sometimes, the word emotion literally means to act. And if you tune into those actions, if you, narrow down why you feel this way, it's super telling. And you can communicate that to yourself and then start the path to be like, okay, what can I control from here? If this is how I feel, where do I want to go from here? But going down the path of what you can't control, if she was trying to, in this instance, tell him not to do this and blah, blah, blah. Like you said, it's human nature. So then when that arises, then what, right? Is he betraying you because he's inclined to do things that he wants to do? Is that what a relationship is meant to be? Honoring other people and not yourself and your desires, So it's really important, I think, communication in general.
Yeah, and those internal conversations you brought up is a super interesting thing because, like, you think a lot in the shower or when you're by yourself, and it's so funny because sometimes you'll go down these rabbit holes and then you'll catch yourself like, wait, how long was I just thinking about that? Whether it was good or bad, it's just kind of funny how we do have these conversations, like, in our own heads. And I've worked on and have gotten better at sometimes there's external factors that whatever's going on in your life, then when you have the freedom of time to think by yourself in the shower or what have you, you're oftentimes really critical and harsh on yourself.
Yes.
And it's not things that are always in your control. And personally, that's when I feel most like critical of myself, is if it's something that's in my control, the opposite. It's like, wait, like you actively made a poor decision. And worst case scenario, let's say it's a decision that you're repeating. Right. So you knew it was bad, but you continue to make a poor decision. That sucks. But, we're not perfect. Like, I always like to use the example of hangovers. I love partying. I love socially drinking, having a good time. But there's a fact I'll never be able to hide from is, like, anxiety is always, for me, at a high usually the next day, like when you're hungover. Yeah. And I can't hide from that fact. That's a pattern I've picked up on. And it's still the balance of, do you know what? It's worth it. Live with the moment, have a good time. Don't get like too hammered to where it's just really bad for you. But sometimes that happens too.
Well, to me, one, we should be self-forgiving and have that kind of compassion for ourselves because we're human. And once you can practice that for yourself and you don't hold yourself too high of a standard that you probably wouldn't do for other people, then you can learn to be compassionate for them as well and their, shortcomings, because who is without them, right? But in response to your hangovers, it sounds like a very conscious decision, right? You're going to have it. You want to have a good time. And that is the difference between, kind of self-reflection, which is like, oh, I know what's coming, but I'm gonna take it, versus rumination, which is a symptom of anxiety, depression, and things like that, where you're just like, I knew I shouldn't have done this. Like, why did I do this? I could have done so, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And that's when it's dangerous mentally, because it immobilizes you and it causes you to then develop these avoidant coping skills, which may be, alcohol or substance abuse, or I always say suicide, which is something that is not to be ashamed of or embarrassed of. It's so common, but is really just an end-all be-all when we don't have those coping skills, when we don't know how to deal with all of this should have, would have, could have, and we don't know where to place it other than just accept it and let it go. Don't let it, carry so much weight in our lives and prevent us from doing the things that we value.
So one of the biggest external factors, because now that you bring up suicide, like we're all on social media now, and like technology and Mark Zuckerberg's initial intentions and these different platforms now, I truly believe are causing so much distress rather internally in people, and it's leading to more suicide. And that's such an external factor. You're still choosing to engage,
right?
You're still choosing to download the app and be on it, but as research has shown now, these things are programmed to manipulate things that your animalistic like brain and nature can't really like fully control. Like you can almost tell yourself that you're not going to go on it as much as you have been, like seeing your screen time or whatever, but you've already been hooked and you're already getting these dopamine shots that are bringing you on. And we spoke a little bit about people, and it ties into suicide, that like we can give people all these tools and coping mechanisms and different philosophies that, if applied correctly, can help them. But there's always gonna be a subset of people that just by sheer luck and the family they were born into and external factors and people they've associated themselves with are gonna be led to a path, like an end way of just true depression and zero love in their lives. We were talking about the idea of love. So like I know you're not a practicing clinician yet, but if there's any like advice, I just want to shoot the shit about like someone down there right now, like contemplating that type of stuff. Like how do we show them love or make them see that life's worth it? Because I will always tell people, and this is just, I'm blessed to have this way of thinking. But like I can go on a walk, be completely alone. Let's say like I have no love in my life, or I'm just really in a bad place, which doesn't really happen for me, like luckily I can say, but like just going and looking at like a dog or a flower or a tree or just the natural beauty in life.
The ordinary.
Yeah, like I can walk around and be like, this is insane. Like how lucky am I to just be able to have these eyes to see that?
Yes.
And the beauty in that take away cars and relationships, which I'm talking from a place that I've never really been, but I'm trying to envision, like, I find so much beauty in that flower or that dog or just seeing someone walking or just tripping out on all these different aspects of life. Like, I could never imagine wanting to lose that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many topics that you covered there, but I think to answer it best, right? So let's go back to social media and suicide, things like that.
Just pull this real quick.
Oh, sorry. How's that?
That's better.
Eckhart Tolle said it best when he describes the ego, which is basically, once you realize you have this ego, then you can separate yourself from your thoughts and your feelings and emotions, right? So all those negative things or, harsh criticisms you have of yourself, it's just an emotion. It's not you, right? There's a self beyond that. And the thing about the ego is that it thrives on compare and contrast. So, maybe it was like an evolutionary tool, right? Before, if so-and-so climbed the tree and survived, you're like, oh, I got to get up on that. I got to do that and, might make sure my offspring thrives or whatever. But in this day and age when we're not really in that like survival mode or that scarcity mindset anymore, we don't need to compare, in order to live. We're living longer than ever, but it's something that's deeply ingrained in us. And when you do that, when you see someone and you want what they have, or you view yourself as less than because you don't have that. You're in a constant state of superior or inferior. And that'll never be satiable, right? There's always going to be someone better, prettier, richer, fitter, whatever. And once you understand that reality, you no longer feel the need to compete. And then you have this new sense of empowerment, confidence in yourself, and hopefully a path to autonomy and reaching your full potential. So that's kind of one aspect. And then you went on to talk about love. So if you're without love, things like that. Eckhart Tolle also defined it best, in my opinion, when he says that the definition of love is when you see yourself in someone else. So to say that you're without love is this idea that it's a one-way thing. You're in a receiving, space of love. When in fact, when you see someone else, he calls all humans interesting life forms. When you see another interesting life form and you're able to say, wow, we have more in common than not. And whether that's in pain or pleasure, then you're in a space of love, right? And that's kind of what you said about gratitude and being able to see and witness. And that's a very conscious, present state of being, which is wonderful. That elicits happiness, because even happiness is not something we can, it's not a destination. But contentedness is something we can totally be on all the time, which is an appreciation for the ordinary. The Conscious Parent by Dr. Shefali Saberi, she writes about this. It's the best parenting book I ever got. And she says that, instead of having your children idolize toys and things and materialistic objects, show them like an apple. Be like, look at this grew from a seed. This came outside, and show them how to plant, and just really, really be able to appreciate the ordinary and not so much focus on the extraordinary, because that's such a small portion of our lives, and that doesn't develop the mindfulness and contentedness that they need in order to cope. But yeah, I think that kind of idea of love is, it just shows you can always pick up and start again. You don't have to wait for this triggering or activating event to occur to you to practice love or feel love. You can see it in other people and then, be giving of it.
Gotcha. You brought up contentness and extraordinary, which is interesting to me because it's something I've thought about and have battled with, the idea of being content, but then Western civilization and being an entrepreneur and a go-getter, it's kind of opposite of that, because how many people are extraordinary that were content, that kind of just found a place where they can just not to be a stalemate, but, just relax and not go too far ahead, but not too far back, just in the middle. Because we're taught, if you're going to be like the CEO of a great company or come up with an amazing invention or what have you, you have to be an extraordinary. You have to go the extra mile. You can't be content. Content is a killer to capitalism by definition.
Totally.
And that's kind of scary. And I've always tried to where can I balance that out and be get your work done, have maybe a certain portion of the day where you're going the extra mile and hustling and grinding, but then you have to know when to turn that off and kick your feet up and just relax.
Yeah.
And not by means of substance. A lot of people, you get home and you want to throw back some wine or have some drinks because that's what brings you back down to that chill level, which could arguably work if you're not abusing alcohol. You can measure biochemically, is it having a negative effect? But just having that balance of it, it's cool to be a go-getter and to hustle and stuff and try to innovate and create things that are going to help society and people at large.
Right.
But you find, because I felt this before, the most happiness sometimes in your life, if you're just worried about you yourself as a person and not focusing too much on the outside world, just yourself as a person, true happiness often is in that place of being content.
Yeah. And it's funny that you point out capitalism, because to be content is Westerners' worst idea. It's all about more, more, more. And Buddhism is rooted in reality, right? So it naturally gravitates toward this idea, this universal truth that desire and attachment are the cause of suffering. So I guess let me back up a little bit. So Buddha's teachings, the Four Noble Truths, is that existence in itself is suffering. And suffering is like the translation to English, but really just means like deep dissatisfaction, right? So life in and of itself is, ordinary or dissatisfying. It's not marvelous all the time. The second being that there's a cause to suffering, which is desire and attachment. The third, that there's a cessation to suffering, which is what they call nirvana or enlightenment, when you're finally at peace and without negative emotions and without that superior, inferior idea of yourself, and receiving and giving of love to others and of service to others, and therefore loving yourself and things like that. And the fourth being the path, which is kind of all of that combined. And so when we speak of being content, it's something in the East that is, something you find is enough. Like they say, enough is a feast, and I'm at peace. Because in the West, we think of content as a bad thing because, well, let's say, when you talk about being a go-getter or CEO, what are we doing? We're measuring success through achievement, right? We qualify who we are and our self-worth through how much we accomplish, when in fact, having that creative flow, like you were saying, and being innovative and things like that, you can still be all those things and be deeply rewarded by those actions, and maybe not be an entrepreneur, CEO, all those things, and yet you're happy. There's this really cool fisherman story. I don't even know where I heard it from or something, but they basically, it's like a Westerner meets an Easterner, and he's a fisherman. And he gets like a few fish here and there. He sells it at the market and then spends the rest of the time with his family. And this Westerner comes, he's a CEO, and he's like, if you hire a bunch of people and you have them fish for you and get like 10 times the amount of fish, you can sell more, and then you can, blah, 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 and, profit. And he was just like, well, why would I want to do that? And he's like, well, when you get everyone to do it for you, then you have more time off to do what you want and all of this stuff. And he was like, I do that now. I just get the few fish I have, like enough really is a feast if we want it to be, if we see it that way. But not to say that being a go-getter or an entrepreneur or, multi-millionaire or whatever is not, is a bad thing either, because maybe you're doing it for the right reasons. Maybe it's not driven through desire or attachment. It's for the better good or the service of people. But a way to make that distinction is to say, well, who am I and what am I when I'm stripped of these things, right? Am I still a good person morally, ethically? Do I turn my suffering into service? Have I learned from all my trouble and help people? Or is it out of greed? And that's usually what a lot of the rich people tend to do. So.
Yeah, because more money, more problems. And a lot of these people who are financially successful aren't always the most happy.
Right.
A little tangent, but you said the idea of suffering in Buddhism. How would they classify like physical pain? Maybe not even that you're doing unto yourselves, but like war and evil in the world. How do they classify that? Like torture?
Well, in regards to, I think you're looking for like a translation to physical pain for them, if suffering is like mental pain and stuff.
Yeah.
I guess that would just be pain, really. I'm assuming at this point. But in regards to war, torture, and all of that, that's greed and attachment. That's why those things come about. And so the thing about Buddhism is that they kind of say, like pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So then you get this distinction of that, life is not all good. It has its hard moments, but it's all in fact neutral unless we give weight to it, right? So even if you have a shit day and a terrible person in your presence, if you can kind of use that as a moment to practice and build tolerance, then you don't really let that affect you, right? And the Dalai Lama actually says that our worst enemy and our troublemakers are our best teachers. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So there's not like a God head figure that's in charge of all the wrongdoing and evil in the world, like in Christianity. It's like the devil and Satan and stuff.
So it's not a theological religion at all, really. I mean, maybe philosophy, because I know that the religion does have like their hells and heavens and things like that, but it's less focused on a deity or a creator and more focused on the present. And the coolest thing I liked about it was they really, really support their followers who investigate their word, so these days in Christianity, you can't really question what my university is actually a Christian university, so I had to take Bible study and all that stuff. But you're not allowed to question the Bible or God's word because that is the devil himself. You know what I mean? Which, much respect to all of that. It's just that's something that was interesting to me. Whereas Buddhism is very open to science, very diligent about modernizing it for the current world. You know, if it's intended to help people and it doesn't, keep up with the times, it'll just fall behind, right? It's not going to hold any moral or ethical values, which is its true intention. The whole idea of Buddhism is just that you understand reality and that you don't question it, you don't try to manipulate it, and you don't suffer over it. You don't try to ruminate over it, and then you can be at peace, right? So if reality is the true nature, how do you defy science? That's science is the explanation of reality through evidence and empirical research and very very, very cool methods.
So, for example, humans' impact on the environment, let's use global warming, and this foreseeable doomsday-like future, where it's not completely out of our control, but would they still say, like, you need to actively problem solve and trying to fix this potential doomsday, like you guys are treating the earth in a certain manner?
Totally.
It's not going to be sustainable.
Yeah.
So is that just like humans? There's not a god or a devil like manipulating you. It's like you literally have to problem solve, like as mini gods. Like all of you are little mini gods. Like figure it out.
The Dalai Lama's main translator, Thupten Jinpa, is a scholar over at Stanford, and I think he said it best when he said that Christians pray to reach heaven in the afterlife. Buddhists rationalize to achieve nirvana or enlightenment in this life. And the way that their life cycle works, and an idea that I've actually adopted and taught my kids and things like that, is that the life cycle, if life is suffering, the life cycle is suffering. They believe in reincarnation. Once, you pass, then you're reborn again. But if you achieve enlightenment or peace, or you're without those negative afflictions and you no longer harm others and, all that comes with that, you will no longer be reborn. You get to, exit the life cycle. You can choose to come back and be a Buddha and teach people and all that. I'm sorry, you don't have to pass to be a Buddha, but Buddhahood can be achieved by anybody. He was a man. He was a real man. It's not like he wasn't, didn't have anything that other people don't have. And that is why it's rooted in reality, because it's attainable. It's within our reach for sure. And it starts with us. That's the best thing, is like, you don't have to look for outside sources. And in fact, when you rely too heavily on the external, you're kind of preventing yourself from getting there.
I like that, because I think that there's a good balance there of some things are out of your control, but be a good person and try to manipulate your environment in a good way to like help yourself and other people and produce good outcomes. So you brought up your teachings to your children, and this is something I wanted to talk about as a millennial couple, millennial mother, the birth of technology and social media, and we see kids out at the dinner table constantly on iPads and
Guilty.
Yeah, so how, I mean, obviously this is your first experience. You can compare yourself to like your parents' motherhood and fatherhood, and then other people in life, like how they parent, and there's not one true way to do it. But what are some challenges that you've faced being a parent in the modern day age, and maybe different tools that you've used and different psychological methods that you're like, oh, I'm actively trying to make my kids like better people and better problem solvers and better copers with emotions. I know the video you posted on Instagram, which was awesome, by the way. It's like a 10-minute clip. You mentioned like I think it was your son made a drawing or whatever, and his sister like judged him for it and didn't like it. So let's touch on that real quick. If you could just tell that story and then how it ties into your parenting methods.
Yeah. So, we just teach them to be very logical, and we don't want them to succumb to their feelings but that sounds bad, like we're teaching them to be robots, but we just don't want their feelings to rule their lives. We want them to be able to cope with all of life's challenges. And so, for example, my son, who is like a drawing fanatic, he like loves to just illustrate for hours on end. He made a drawing, and my middle, Blake, was like, "Oh, I don't like that drawing." And he came up to me. He's quite sensitive. And he was in tears, and he was like, "She doesn't like my drawing. Like, what do I do? Like, she's so mean and all this stuff." And I'm like, "Well, is that an opinion or a fact?" That's also something we taught them at a very young age. And he was like, "It's an opinion." And I said, "Okay, what's your opinion? You know, do you like it? And was it fun to do?" And he's like, "Yeah, it was." And I was just like, "Okay, well, you know, if you enjoy drawing, it's of value to you. Keep doing it. You know, don't worry about what other people say, and just, you know, do what you love." And that's something I didn't say in the moment, but something nobody can take away from us, right? Because if I was to go and scold my daughter and say, "Hey, you better tell Hayden you like his drawing," then I'm changing up his environment to, you know, kind of adjust to him, which is not reality. That's not the world, you know? And so, and Blake, I mean, she's nuts. She's like always stating her opinion, no matter whether it's welcome or not. So yeah, he definitely needs tough skin being her brother. So
On that point real quick, that's such an interesting fact that you can raise your kids the same way, but biologically there's going to be like genetic differences where their personalities are so different. They're different people, I imagine. I mean, I don't have kids yet, but no, that's what I've heard.
So different. Like when we just had two, especially a boy and a girl, we're like, okay, like square and circle. And then we had a third and we're like triangle. Like there is no like, you know, when you only have two, you always compare and contrast. And then you have a third and you're like, they're all so different and definitely their own people. Like I always hate the term mini me or something like that because they are not you. They are not maybe a portion genetically, but they are their own people from the second they're like conceived probably. But I think there's a second part to your question. I'm sorry.
So to bring it back full circle on like different methods or I don't know, just advice that you've lived through it, and it's not black or white. We obviously have our own different experiences and whatnot, but it's still, you're doing something right.
Thanks. Okay, talking about social media and how do you raise children in that aspect.
Technology and all that.
Yeah. So, you know, it's so hard to not see perfect moms or perfect upbringings or environments and all this stuff and think like I should be doing that, right? But once you're able to turn all these practices into implementation, you realize like, oh, this is just my ego trying to make me better. It's not something that's a definition of my worth or who I am. And I'm kind of doing my own thing here, and that's just going to have to be okay, because I think a big thing about motherhood and social media is that you have this idea that maybe people don't have it as hard as you. Like, oh, well, maybe they're thriving because they have this amount of money or this amount of support, or, oh, maybe their kids are good, or, you know, but that's not the case. That'll never be the case. And to even begin to measure hardships versus, you know, lack thereof, it's just, you'll never win that battle. So Buddhism really helped me take on what I had at hand, appreciate it for what it was and what it teaches me. My children have taught me much more than I've taught them in regards to tolerance and patience and just seeing the way they experience the world. And then just kind of, you know, accept that it's going to be ordinary most of the time. But if you show them to see the beauty in the ordinary, you guys will have a lot of fun, a lot of great moments. And also, gosh, there was something else.
That's all right.
So many things.
That's amazing, though, because my mom had 3 of us by 24 too, so she was a very young parent. And sometimes I like to think of it as that's at that stage, if you're having kids that young, it's almost kids raising kids, which is good because like we're so close. But there's got to be a difference between that and then someone who's like 40. And I mean, there's biological differences there as like a man and a woman. Like there's not many 45-year-old females having kids, you know?
Yeah. Well, you'd be surprised with surrogacy and like freezing your eggs, all that stuff. Yeah.
True. But just the difference between being a young parent, and it sparked in my head because you said, I've learned so much from them too in this experience. And that's a beautiful thing. It's like you're humans in the same household and they're your kids and you're teaching each other things and you're supposed to be the parent, like putting down orders, this top down like type of model.
Yeah.
And the difference between that to like a 60-year-old man having young kids,
Yeah.
it's just so in his foundation and ideology most likely set, not as fluid.
Right. I was just going to say, I mean, I can't speak of being an older parent, but being a younger one, you're not, from my experience, I'm not so rigid and set in my ways. I feel like I'm pretty tolerant and supportive of their curiosity and where that takes them. In my family, a lot of people told you what to do and how to do it and, what not to do. And when you go against that, that's disrespectful and that's not love. And, we've definitely adopted this idea that they can do anything they want to do. They just can't stop, right? So if, like, my son, for example, wants to draw as his career, then, go get the education and the necessities to completely excel in that, to be a master of it. Because also in psychology, they talk about motivation, and they say that there was, like, a study done by Oxford, and they wanted to see if, like, more pay would generate better work quality, and it never did. They upped it by, like, 2.5 months, and it still didn't work. They took it to, like, India, New Delhi, where the amount of money, American dollars, is a lot out there, and there was no correlation. And so they said, well, what motivates people? And it was intrinsic motivation, the things you do for free, like pick up a guitar on the weekends or want to learn a new sport or something. And so we've always kind of told our kids, like, do what you want to do, internal factors, right? Don't worry about the external factors. Don't worry about making money or being rich or things like that. Not that that's not important, obviously, but you can also be very content and at peace and happy by living within your means, because sometimes you have to sacrifice maybe the high-paying job to do something you love, So we're just supportive of anything so long as they really want to receive the right education and become a master at their craft.
Nice. Is there anything that you guys have done as parents to try to combat the fact that communication skills in the younger generation through technology and just locking in on screens, is there anything you do to combat that? Like maybe scheduled family time or put that away, like we're going to discuss as a family now, like face to face and talk to each other and not just, oh, here's an iPad, go in the corner and chill.
Yeah. I mean, well, we eat every meal together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We have a dining table and the whole thing, so we always have that time. But aside from that, we're always together. I mean, Jeremy goes to work, I work on the weekends, so we kind of just like take turns with the kids. But we are always together, so aside from, the small time with screens, we're constantly talking and just interacting, whether verbally or not. And it's just so funny when you listen to the things they have to say outside of the screens. They're their own little people, like we kind of teach them those communications tools as well. Like my daughter, who's kind of a handful, she'll always say, like, Hayden, like, just leave me alone. I'm having a hard time, and
how old is she?
She's 4, going on like 14. But my sister always laughs at her and she's like, that is you, Macy. Like, she is you. Because I do have to say that to, I have 3 kids. I have a husband. We have a dog. Like, there's just so much going on, like, as a sensorial experience. Sometimes you just need to be like, I can't be what you need me to be right now. Just give me a second. So we've definitely taught them how to communicate their needs and wants and kind of get them away from that passive-aggressive dialogue, like we were saying, which I think is easy for girls, but sometimes boys are quite, at least the ones with us, are non-confrontational. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Were there any challenges that you faced this past year with, like, the kids having to stay at home due to COVID and not going off to school? What was that like?
It was really hard because I went back to school because my son was in kindergarten, my girls were at daycare. It was just me and my buddy Bosco, my dog, and I was like,
Bosco.
Yeah, I was like, I think I want to go back to school. Like, I have all this time now and, all this stuff. And then the next thing I know, literally 1 month in, I'm like, oh, like, schools are getting closed down. Like, okay, Hayden's at home, like, they're at daycare. And it's like, oh, their daycare got closed down like 2 days after. I'm like, okay, I have all 3 kids, but it's online. I think I should be fine. And the next thing I know, my job closes down. And then within a few months of that, Jeremy worked for the Irvine Company for 8 years, and he got laid off,
Oh
actually.
no.
And he's on the property management side of it, so we always lived on site. And so we had to kind of be uprooted from our space in LA and come back here to Orange County, come back home. And it's just like my world got turned upside down. And that's when I had to really say, who am I when I'm stripped of all these things, right? And how do I kind of make sense of all this change that I had no control over for the most part? But, you know, having like my son home, having all the kids home, it's a lot to balance and juggle, but you just kind of pick and choose your battles, and you know what's worth your energy and what's not. You know, so like if we're going to go out to dinner, maybe we don't do that often because of the shutdown, but like my 1-year-old's screaming and she wants my phone. I'll let her have YouTube so we can have one peaceful dinner, you know, or if I give them a screen so I can hop in the shower real quick, like I'm fine with that, you know? So it just depends on like the whole balance thing and what you really feel comfortable with and are consciously allowing them to do.
And that's such an amazing fact that like you scale up, like if you were some alien like up in the sky looking down on this pandemic and the change it forced on people like yourself with kids, it like you're trying to work or you're getting laid off, or now you're used to this 6-hour window or 8-hour window where you weren't having to be around your kids all the time. It's just a totally different thing, and I think we're adaptable and you get used to anything. But all of
not
the
easy.
different households and the situations that ensued, and I imagine just different hardships all over the world from just being forced in. And there's been also good talk though on a positive note that it forced people to like become that family unit again, that it's like you're always around. It's kind of old school, like if you were a tribe back in the day, and it's not like, oh, mom and dad go off to work and the kids go to school and there's just this standard American way of doing it. Like everyone was just in the house. Divorces were made. People, I imagine, got closer. And it's just, it was something that was out of your control. That's a trippy external factor. That's nature.
Right.
And of course there's humans like the president or people that are supposed to deal with the problem to mitigate its effect on its people. Right. And no one knows exactly how it's going to go down, but there's just all these different cause and effects, and you felt the brunt of it. And Jeremy too, that's super sad. The Irvine Company, I mean, shit, they're a cash cow.
Oh my God, there's so many.
If he's managing, what was his position again? It was on site, like
maintenance, property management.
Oh, got it. I mean, if you're not having people leave the complex or whatever, and like if rent's still being made, then like the demand's still there for his position. It's just interesting. I was thinking about
totally.
Like the Irvine Company is
and it was
such
deemed
a powerhouse.
Essential, you know. And thankfully, he got a new job now. He actually was promoted, and like he's with a company, kind of like the Irvine Company, but at a larger global scale. So we really are kind of better off in a way. You know, it really took that suffering and that ripping the Band-Aid off of a place where we were so comfortable and we thought was thriving, but it wasn't. It was preventing us from growth and opportunity. But that's in hindsight, right? When I was in that moment, I've had the worst depression of my life. I just could not accept all of these different things because I felt this irrational idea, like I finally got things in order, you know, like we're done having kids, they're all out of the house, I'm back to work, I'm back to school, I'm developing my my independence again, and now it's all coming crashing down. And it was really hard, but once I chose to, you know, say, okay, well, I'm not just my job, I'm not just where we live, I'm not just the space that we inhabit, I'm so much more than that, and I can still be of service to others. I kind of switched from like a scarcity mindset to a fixed scarcity mindset to like abundance. And so when I was depressed, I went from like, you know, it was like wading through water every day. Like every day I'm like, gosh, I wish I wasn't here. Why us? How did this happen to us? You know, it was hard for me to show up for myself, my husband, my kids. And then I had this transition through this application where I said, I can't control what happened to me, but I can control, you know, applying for jobs, or I like became active again. I started going for morning runs, and then it turned into, you know, the gym and things like that. Just things that were literally for me, by me, and something no one could take from me. And those were the little like breadcrumbs to peace and content. And so from there, it kind of pulled me out, and then it became larger things. And then I started seeing my relationships getting better. I went from not being able to care for myself and my kids, kind of, to now being able to help out with my grandparents twice a week. Like, where did all this energy come from? I couldn't imagine this a couple months ago, but now I just have so much service to offer. I have so much love to give, right? That it made me feel confident again. It made me feel worthy again when I didn't have those other things to define me.
That's amazing, because there's so much value in that, in terms of in the moment it sucks. I imagine it's so hard, and hindsight's always 2020, but
Yeah.
I imagine you're a better person because of it, and it gave you more mental strength, and now you can carry that with you forever. So if someone's facing, I guess the only advice I would have in that moment would be like, just hold on and know that whatever you're feeling is kind of short term.
Right.
And so many people went through that, like you did with the past year's shutdowns, that in the end, you're going to be stronger because of it. Or hopefully, it depends on how you think about it. And you found tools that gave you that ability to pull the positives from it in the end. But that's just life, especially as a young person too. In a job interview, or just conversations with your parents, or just your outlook on the world, like as time goes by, like as you experience more things, just try to pull those learning lessons and just become stronger because of it. And know in 5 years, if you're doing things right and actively like thinking consciously about your life, you're going to be a better person than you are today.
Right.
And in 10 years, and just, that's at least how I try to look at it.
And I mean, there's always a lesson to be learned if you're willing to accept what occurred and learn from it, right? That's productivity. But if you deny it, like I was doing, and like, why me? How could this be? Blah, blah, blah. Then you don't learn anything from it, and you hate it, and you suffer from it, because every day you think this is like an isolated or independent event that's just happening to you, and it's not. But also, it's kind of like positivity or gratitude is so widely spoken about here in the West as a tool to like cope, but I actually find that it can be quite dismissive sometimes, or quite toxic sometimes, because sometimes when you're like, I have so much, I shouldn't feel this, then you're not able to accept the reality, right? It's the should've, could've, would've's again, like REBT. And so if you kind of just say like what you were saying when you go on your walks, which is like, I can see, I can hear, I can touch the ones I love, I can experience things, then this gratitude is internal. It's something that you have and hold, versus external, which is like, I should be grateful I have my car. I should be grateful I have, this bag, or, this house or whatever. And that'll always kind of cap off somewhere. But if you develop that compassion for yourself and what you have outside of those things, you'll always be able to bring yourself back to that center.
Totally, because there's something to be said there too about like, most people in the United States aren't facing true struggle like our ancestors did, in terms of like, where's the next meal, or is the roof over our head going to hold up for this storm coming, or is that tribe over there going to come over and attack us? And you have a real like life and death meaningful task at hand every single day. And now that you just got the grocery store down the street, or I mean, housing here is not that affordable, but for the most part, like you can be comfortable. It's affordable in the sense like, oh, you might not be able to afford that place with the brand new wooden floors and countertops and appliances, but like you most likely can make it happen with even a minimum wage job.
Totally.
But since we have all those baselines covered now, it's like, where are these problems? Where are these anxieties coming from? My car isn't like my neighbor's car, or I wasn't able to get my nails or hair done. People must be judging me because I don't look the way that I want to look. And there's so many different things that are added up now, because it's not just, I'm awake, we got to go catch this next animal so we could feed the tribe now. It's always like our technology and civilization has surpassed a long time ago, like our biological like brains, like the
Yeah.
way that we were programmed to think through evolution. It's it's such a trip.
Yeah, I think psychology's kind of explanation of that is Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
We have these fundamental base things like food, shelter, water, being the bottom, and even though it's a hierarchy, they don't, they always say it's not a linear thing. It's always kind of one or the other, and what are you willing to sacrifice to get the other or to reach the other things? And um, if you are, then that's usually a materialistic drive. It's not for the right reasons, because really at the top is self autonomy and like philanthropy, which is giving back. And so I think also kind of circling that back to um, just Buddhism or religion and all of that stuff, I think what's really important is the promotion of religious harmony. And if you look at another psychological theory, this is Kohlberg's theory of moral development. There are 3 stages of it, and you have this pre-conventional stage, which is like reward and punishment. That's how you like condition your children, things like that. And then you have this conventional stage, the middle one, which is like good boy, good girl, where you act good because society says you should be this way. So then you want to appear that way to conform and assimilate, but still not really an internal, moral compass or anything like that. And then you have the post-conventional, which they say most people don't even really get there. And that's when you have this morality or code of ethics that goes beyond the social norm. So that's what we see, with like racial injustice today, feminism, people who say, society and the law, it's pretty good, but this is like baseline. We could go further. We could be better, more of a universal principle. Think like MLK, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, people who went above and beyond and even served time and received consequence for wanting to make it better for everybody else. So sacrifice, right? And so I think that's why it's important to have religious harmony, because you accept that all these multiple realities exist. And in fact, every faith at its core does kind of promote that code of ethics and these ideas that we should be better, we should be kinder, more compassionate, and in service to others. That's a very universal thing. But even for those who maybe aren't religious, you can still have a good, strong set of values and be a good person. That doesn't take like practice or faith to, work on that. So
That's a good way of putting it, because I always like to preach that too. Religious or not, still be an asshole. Try to be a good person. But where do you see the future in applied psych and all the turmoil that ensued this past year with BLM, and like you said, realizing that things are good and we've gotten so much better over time, but there's still improvements to be made.
yeah,
But with that being said, at least people's formulating solutions this past year caused a lot of divide and anger and division amongst a lot of people.
yeah,
I like to think, just because I'm a very optimistic person, that these are just growing pains and we're still moving in the right direction, but we're just living through not just the American experiment, but the world experiment. You bring up all these different religions coinciding, and problems in the Middle East due to religious morals and ethics have been happening for thousands of years now. And I'm always blessed and try to remind myself, in the United States, from a foundation, like we are told, it's our law that you have to coexist amongst people that are different than you. Like you can't judge or discriminate
right.
just because someone's Muslim or someone thinks a different way than you. That's literally
Legally.
rooted in our like Constitution,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. That's amazing. We're so lucky, just pure chance to be born on this soil.
Yeah.
But to bring it back, so like, where do you see the future if you could kind of pinpoint it? Do you think one day, whether it's 500 years, 1,000 years, it's going to be true harmony, and people aren't going to really see color, and it's just going to be like, oh, you're just a fellow U.S. citizen? Yeah.
No, so that's irrational thinking, right? To try to estimate or predict. That's against Buddhist law. You don't, or not the real law, but the practice, right? If you have there's no chance, zero chance of you being able to assume or, expect, then don't waste our time. But as far as like, all of the kind of conflict for society, that's the external factor, right? That is, we, regardless of what will happen, because we don't know, or what caused it to happen, it simply is. It's reality now. And us and how we cope with that, how that affects us at an individual level, that's what's within our control. It being as it is not within our control. But once again, let's go middle way, right? So, for example, well, I'll do that later, but basically, if you start small, kind of like the breadcrumbs, right? And maybe you're active in your family about, just talking about these things and these issues, and not necessarily having the superior inferior dialogue, but just sharing things and just seeing how someone so similar to you, raised by the same people in the same family, could have such polar views. Then you have a little bit of connection there. That's progress, right? And then when you bring it at a bigger scale, maybe the community, and you talk to different groups and things like that, then you're also kind of getting a little bit of progress, right? And so those breadcrumbs eventually lead to what we hope is going to affect the external factors. But you got to start small. And another testimony of mine was a friend who is Black, and she was, her dilemma in the sentence, let's start from there, is that, my boss is a bigot, and he is doing everything he can to see me fail because I'm Black. That's my dilemma. And so I said, okay, so your internal factor is you and your job and your, the way you work. The external factor being your boss being a bigot. We have no control over that. He is set in his ways, and he will be that way regardless of our actions, right? And I said, so what you can control is how you perform, how you work, and simply how you are. Because when you carry yourself in the way that you naturally want to be, you have these connections with people, right? You see these similarities in each other, and you kind of generate that love, and then it extends to work, and then you can perform better and just simply show up with all that you have to offer, productive or not, just by simply being. And this bigot that, is your manager, they naturally think that you're maybe less or less productive. Like, they just want to see you fail. And it's probably unfair that, people of color tend to have to be squeaky clean in regards to, maybe their white counterparts. But that is the reality, right? We can't deny that. And if you just do as you do and make sure you don't slip up and don't give him a reason to have that power over your job and your performance and your future, then you take that power back, and you can be happy again and content and at peace, regardless of these terrible external factors and cards that you were dealt. So it kind of starts small and then eventually gets bigger and bigger to affect the external things.
I like that. So, because I was going to push back initially in terms of like trying to foresee a future with present day external factors, because the goal, like I said early on, was to hopefully try to affect external factors to create a more ideal civilization for not just yourself, but all humanity. But it's beautiful the way you put it, because start off with yourself, because if you're not happy with yourself, you're not going to really be able to fix anything in society, let alone your children. Yeah. They're going to be affected by the way you act. So if you start by raising good little humans around you and then just rub off on people in the workplace, that's a community in itself. And then you could start with like the local community at large, and then the state and the country. But that's a good way of putting it, is just starting off small, and that takes a lot of small different groups that hopefully affect the whole over time.
Right.
And I think that's where we're going to be. Like, that's what we're doing right now. I mean, just by virtue of having this conversation, that's the main reason I wanted to start Mind Meetings, was just to talk about things like this.
Totally.
Just to get it out there, and people are going to hear your story and connect, like, oh, I was a struggling mother this past year with kids and got laid off, or my husband got laid off too, and just not feeling alone. We all go through these things.
I always say we all have more in common than not, and it's so true, especially in regards to our struggle. But, kind of going back to the small scale and large scale, and, how we contribute to that external outcome for society, I think that's what is probably the most dangerous thing about social media and all of this accessibility to knowledge and information is that we consume so much all the time, and then we react, right? We repost it or cancel culture, all these things that come with that, instead of internalizing, letting it sit, responding, and maybe becoming an advocate for awareness of the issue and things like that. And that is what generates change. It's solution focused, right? It's planning, it's actively seeking a better result than what we're getting now. But if you just want to talk about it and just complain and say, look at how terrible this person is, but I don't want to really invest any time into making it better, then you're kind of a part of the problem, right? So it has to start small, and it has to start with intention and real purpose to generate change. Because if you're not in that space, you're just a troll. You just want to hop on whatever and publicly cancel, people who may be trying. So
That's a fact, because it's so much easier just to repost or share something to get some social credit within your biased network, because your followers
Right.
and like you're just perpetuating the same ideology, and you're mirroring off one another. And sometimes people get in disputes or debate, but the fact is too, it's not the healthiest way to do it. Like, you're just texting, like you're typing, you're not seeing each other's faces or hearing tones of voice and all these things. And in the next couple months, hopefully, I'm going to make an announcement for a product that I'm launching that hopefully helps combat and solve this issue. Like, I spent a lot of time on it yesterday, but I'm really excited about it.
Cool.
But I really appreciate you coming on today and just telling your story. And you have a lot of like beautiful ways of putting things that, when you start applying these different ways of thinking about your problems, it just makes your life better. And then by virtue of that, you're going to have a more positive impact on your kids and your family and your community and hopefully society at large.
Totally.
So I appreciate it.
Thank you. This was so fun. I'm so glad you had me here, and I love talking about all this stuff. And I'm excited to see your new products.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you
Good
for
luck
coming
with
on.
that.
All right, you guys, with that being said, talking goes a long way. Catch you next time.